Hello everyone, my name is Gary Blackwood, professional poker player and coach for Upswing Poker. Today we're going to talk about the leaks that I see really consistently, really commonly when I work with students here at Upswing Poker. These are the leaks that I see all the time. They're really common, really consistent, and they're easy to plug. So let's go ahead, check them out, and you can plug them yourself and start to add big blinds to your win rate really, really easily. The first leak that I want to talk about is very common. It is a lack of aggression in the right spots. This is demonstrated perfectly in the clip we're about to see. Let's check it out. So the 7-3 deuce flop is not a bad flop for our range. We've got a lot of the lower stuff. As well as that, when we construct our stabbing range on the flop, we want to choose hands like this, which have no showdown value. They can turn a bunch of equity. They can continue to barrel when they pick up that equity. So a hand like this, I would bet on the flop very, very often. We've got some equity hands like ace-4 and 5-4 and 5-6, which have straight draws, but a hand like this, which can turn straight draws and flush draws galore, very high frequency stab for us. So we want to, this is a really common leak that people have. Let's actually pull this one up in the solver. I think it's a really nice visual. So I'm going to just sort of show. Now, obviously, our opponent has raised to a very small size pre-flop, which means our range is going to be wider than this. We get to call hands like 9-7 suited and 8-6 suited and so on versus the very small size. But if we look at a 7-3 deuce rainbow flop here, which the big blind should check, I'm going to guess about 50%. Yep, 54%. So the big blind checks. Let's take a little look at the types of hands that want to stab on the flop. So a hand like king queen suited, virtually never. A hand like ace queen and ace jack, not very often at all. But hands like 9-8 suited and 10-8 suited and jack-9 suited that can turn a bunch of equity, these are really, really nice stabs for us. We actually prefer to bet a hand like 10-8 suited compared to a hand like 6-5 suited. Just those two overs, the backdoor straight draw, the backdoor flush draw, all these types of hands. So the point that I want to make is that when our opponent checks to us on these low semi-connected boards that are good for us in 3-bet pots, it's really important that we're stabbing quite a wide range, and we can clearly see, you know, a lot of us watching this will be under stabbing. We're supposed to stab here 57% of the time. A lot of us watching this will be stabbing, 20 or 30% of the time, and it will be a much more value heavy range that is stabbing. Really important. We're finding the queen tens and the jack tens and the jack nines and the 9-8 suiteds and the 10-8 suited type hands. So anything that can turn straight and flush draws, really high frequency stabs. If we hover over the 10-8 suited, for example, the solver is choosing 10-8 of spades relatively often. The way that I prioritize my stabs are that I want to have the backdoor equity. So I won't stab 10-8 suited, 10-8 of spades as often, but my 10-8 of clubs and hearts and diamonds and things like that, much higher frequency stabs. Yeah, just to really reiterate the point, we're supposed to stab really often on these low connected boards when check does. And it might feel a little uncomfortable when you've just got queen high, but when your opponent check calls, they eliminate a lot of really strong hands from their range, like overpairs, and we get to sort of take the pot away from them on the flop or take it away from them on the turn or the rip. So let's be aggressive when people check to us with the right types of hands. You'll notice we don't stab hands like ace-10 and ace-9 suited and king-jack suited and king-queen suited. They've all got a little too much showdown value. But these trashy, 9-8s and 10-8s and 10-9s and stuff like that, really high frequency stabs. I think people are aggressive enough for the most part when they've got the betting lead or if they're the pre-flop aggressor. That's a little easier. However, on the other side of the coin, I think a really consistent, really common leak is people are not aggressive enough when they're the pre-flop caller. And we're going to break this down using Upswing Poker's tool Lucid GTO Trainer to give you guys a couple of examples where we're the pre-flop caller and we want to be really quite aggressive. So let's check out a 3-bet pot scenario. We're going to use the exact scenario we've just seen in the footage there. We're going to call a 3-bet on the button versus the big blinds. And we've got a 7-3 deuce rainbow flop. Now, the pre-flop aggressor is the big blind here, of course, and they're supposed to be really quite passive on this flop. They're supposed to check more than half the time, and any scenario where our opponent has a higher checking frequency, our stabbing frequency is going to increase. Let's force the check for the big blinds, and we can see all the types of hands here that want to stab from the point of view of the button. We're supposed to stab here over half the time ourselves, and some of these combos might feel a little counterintuitive. Let's talk about the obvious ones first of all. On 7-3 deuce, we've got hands like ace-5, ace-4, 5-6, and 5-4. We've got these higher equity draws. We've got gut shots, open-ended straight draws. These are really common, really easy to find. We've also got some kind of crazy combos that want to stab here if we've called a 3-bet with ace king or with ace queen or ace jack. These hands actually like to stab, and they're not bluffs, they're actually value bets. Let's very quickly force the stab for the button, and we can see that when we do stab ace queen, we're actually getting called by quite a lot of worse combos in theory. Hands like king queen, ace 4, ace 5, queen 9, king 9, all these types of hands that the big blind is supposed to check call, which is why we want to stab hands like ace queen and ace king at some frequency. Let's take a little look at some of the other types of hands that want to stab now and the frequencies with which we want to stab. We really want to stab hands like queen 10, jack 9, 10, 9, 10, 8 at a very high frequency for two reasons. First of all, hands like 10, 8, 10, 9, jack 9, they can pick up equity and continue to barrel. So these are really nice combos to really increase our frequencies with, so that when we bet the flop, we pick up that equity, we can go ahead and continue to barrel. There's also some combos like queen 10, queen 9, they can pick up flush draws, they can't pick up straight draws, but they like to stab on the flop because they have really nice unblockers. They unblock hands like ace high and king high, so they can bet the flop and they can continue to be aggressive on these low turns that force the big blind to check fold on the turn with hands like ace high and king high. Let's illustrate that perfectly. A hand like queen 10 suited. It's going to take a stab on the flop. The big blind is going to call. Let's do the 5 of diamonds, complete rainbow, and we will see that our queen 10s and our jack 10s, they like to continue to barrel on the turn because they are just unblocking all of the check calls on the flop that now have to go ahead and check fold on the turn. So coming all the way back to our flop strategy here, it's really important that we find these non-equity stabs on the flop with hands like jack 9, queen 9. I personally prioritize being able to turn backdoor equity, so I put a lot of weight in hands like 10-8 suited, 10-9 suited that can turn straight draws and flush draws. But these queen jacks, queen 10s, queen 9s, they're really important to find because they make for really nice barrels on the turn. When our opponent check calls, we can make them check fold really often on the turn. Let's switch it up now and look at a single raise pot. We're going to force the hijack to raise. Let's take a little look at what the button should be calling with here. Obviously doing a lot of 3-betting, but plenty of hands like 7-6 suited, pocket 7s, pocket 8s, some suited ace-x. Lots of these different types of combos. So everyone else is going to just fold. And let's take a little look at a hand like 8-4 deuce with a flush draw. As we can see, in theory, the hijack is supposed to check close to their entire range on the flop. The reason being is that when we add in all these offsuit combos like queen 10 offsuit, king 10 offsuit, ace 9, ace 10, etc., it really bloats the range of the either position player. And if you'll remember, we do some flatting on the button with some offsuit combos, but we don't have queen 10, king jack, king 10, ace 9, etc. So our range is really quite condensed. And as a result, on these low boards, it's much stronger. Now, remember earlier I said whenever the aggressor has got a high checking strategy, that means as the caller will have a high stabbing strategy. This is proven by the fact that we are supposed to stab here 63% of the time. And again, we've got some equity combos. We've got hands like straight draws and flush draws, but we've got lots and lots of hands like jack 9 of spades and jack 10 of hearts here, which don't have a straight draw. They don't have a flush draw. They don't have a backdoor flush draw, but still really aggressively stabbing. Ask yourself, when checked in this scenario, am I stabbing enough? I think the answer is almost certainly not. So let's go ahead and up our stabbing frequencies. I actually think it's better to stab more than this, because when we do stab, in theory, the hijack is supposed to check raise here 23% of the time. The reality is people are not check raising as much as they should, which means that we can exploitatively stab even more than the solver is suggesting and put our opponents in a world of hurt on the flop and on future straights. So there you have it, two different examples, two really important examples where we're the pre-flop caller, and I don't think players are anywhere near as aggressive enough as they should be. So let's go ahead and up our stabbing frequencies on the right types of boards where our range can absolutely support it. All right, let's move on to leak number 2. Now, this is the most common leak that I find in students. It is calling too much from the big blind, particularly multi-way, particularly in higher rate games. Let's go ahead and check out the clip. So we've elected to 3-bet the ace 7 offsuit.
I think we called, I think.
Oh, okay, yes. So we were debating 3-betting it, and then we decided.
Yeah.
Okay, pause for me, please. So talk me through your decision as to whether or not you would 3-bet this, or call it, or fold it, or what's going on there.
Yeah, I just prefer, I don't like 3-betting now because I think it's too weak. I'd much rather 3-bet like 7-6 suited, for example. Or better ace-x, like his jack, his queen, his 10 suited. Yeah, I just don't know why I was debating that. I actually don't know if it's a clear call. I know we had to be much tighter from the big blind, but I think A7 is a call, right?
Oh, I think we want to fold. This is
Oh,
our
really?
yeah, for sure. A really common
Okay.
issue that a lot of people have here is they
Yeah.
way too wide from the big blind. And ace 7 offsuit
All right.
is going to be a fold for us as well. There's a couple of different factors. One, it's a fold anyway. Just in general, it's a fold we don't want to call here. But two, people call way too wide at these stakes from the big blinds. This is a higher rake environment, so we need to be even more. Our calling range needs to be tighter
Yep.
from the big blinds. Sorry.
Yeah, I see. No. I get the concept. I just know like the range,
For sure.
but yeah.
Having said that, pause the video for me. Not quite done talking about this part yet. One of the biggest improvements that anyone watching this can make in their game is their big blind defense strategies. So my advice to you would be to choose your pre-flop charts. If you have access to Lucid, then go ahead and use those religiously. But study them
Mhm.
and brush up on them, particularly when it comes to defending the big blind. Take a little look at the types of hands that want to call big blind versus cutoff, big blind versus hijack, big blind versus under the gun, and then tighten them up a little bit more. Let's do that right now, actually. So this is the standard cutoff open, and this is what we're supposed to call from the big blind. So as we can clearly see, ace 6 offsuit, ace 3 offsuit, ace deuce offsuit folds. Ace 7 offsuit in theory is calling a little tiny bit, but then we factor in the
Mostly
higher.
folding.
Sorry.
Yeah, mostly folding.
Yeah, but then we factor in the higher rake environment. There are a lot of hands here that we don't want to call. For example, ace 8 offsuit, ace 7, ace 4. Hands like jack 3, jack 4 suited, 8 4 suited, 3 deuce suited. The list goes on. So bit
Well,
versus the cutoff. Obviously we can change this and look at all the different scenarios that we could find ourselves in. But yeah, the important point that I want to make here is that it's really important that we have a good idea of the types of hands that do want to defend. So I'd recommend that you spend a bit of time brushing up on your pre-flop strats, but also to be mindful of the higher rake environment where you can't call hands like queen 9 offsuit and jack 9 offsuit and ace 4 offsuit and so on. One of the great things about this Lucid GTO Trainer tool is we've got the scenario of low rate cash games, but we've also got high rate cash games as well. Really, really important. But whenever we play lower stakes, the rate tends to be a little higher. So it's really important that we're adjusting accordingly. So let's take a little look here. Let's do something completely random off the top of my head. Let's say the hijack raises, we're in a high rake environment, and we're defending out the big blind. Some of us will be calling with hands like offsuit ace-x, king 9 offsuit, suited queen-x, jack-x, even hands like 10-6, 9-5. They're semi-connected in higher rake environments, unfortunately. These are just not defendable. We just can't defend these hands. There are also hands like queen 10 offsuit and jack 10 offsuit, which in theory are mixing. They're not pure calls. Now, when you factor in the fact that some people will raise to 2.5 big blinds or 3 big blinds, that means our rate should actually get even tighter. So it's really important we're not calling too wide from the big blind in higher rake environments. And now let's take a little look when we're multi-way. So let's force the hijack to raise, the button to call. This will be really quite surprising to some of us watching. The big blind strategy here is to play really, really quite tight. Now, let's talk about the obvious combos that we shouldn't be calling with. Hands like queen deuce suited, jack 5, jack 6, 10-6, 4 deuce, 3 deuce. These are combos that are relatively obvious that we shouldn't be defending. However, in theory, in this exact scenario versus 2 regs, out of position versus 2 players, ace 10 offsuit, king 10 offsuit, queen jack offsuit, queen 9 suited, jack 7 suited. These are really surprising combos which we can't profitably defend in higher rake environments. I really hope some of us watching this our jaws are on the floor right now because this is kind of crazy. I did specify this exact scenario versus 2 regs. Let's talk about if one of the players is a weaker player. The button, say for example, is a weaker player here. Their range is not going to look like this. If it's a recreational player, they're going to have all these hands, all these types of hands. The reason the big blind in theory can't defend with hands like ace 10 offsuit is because it's really quite dominated. With queen 8 suited, it's really quite dominated. However, if either of these players, particularly the bottom caller, is a recreational player, then obviously we do get to defend a little bit wider. Another really important factor, if the hijack raises and the small blind calls, being in position versus one player means that we get to defend a little bit wider. However, if we're out of position versus 2 solid players, our big blind defense range is really quite tight. It's a little depressingly boring, But winning poker doesn't have to be super flashy, super loose, super aggressive. It's about playing the right combos. And if it means folding ace 10 offsuit because it's not profitable, because the rake is so high, let's go ahead, let's tighten up from the big blind multi-way and fold these marginal hands. So we've broken down the first 2 leaks in the solver. I'm not going to be able to do that for the next one. It's a very fun but very important leak. Let's check out the clip and then we can break it down. So MP has limped and we've decided to over limp on the button. Any thoughts on that? Can you talk us through that one?
Yeah, so let me just hit right, so it's MP.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I was considering either over limping or popping it up to like 3.6.
Yeah.
What went with the more passive option. Um if I'm on my game, I would look at the blinds and think about like, is the big blind someone I want to keep in the pot versus push out of the pot? In this case, I didn't because looking at him, that's looking at it now, I'd be more likely to raise it to 3.6 to keep it, sort of looks like decent players in both the blinds, right?
Cool.
Yeah, or from what we have on limited stats.
Any thoughts on the size, the 3.6 size? Is that a standard isolate for you?
Uh, Fairly standard for me sometimes, and this is more like targeting a fishier player. I'll pop it up to 4 just to start inflating the pot, or at least with a stronger hand. Yeah, I guess 3.6 would be standard for me.
Okay, a couple of things to talk about. First of all, the size. I think when you make it 3.6, you're kind of allowing other players to come into the pot. The big blind gets to come in a little more cheaply, and therefore they come in more frequently. And the purpose of our isolate is to isolate our opponent. So we don't want to allow other players to come into the pot too easily. So I would go at least 4 in this scenario. So whenever we're isolating in position, we want to go 4 big blinds. The purpose is to isolate the player. We don't want to go multi-way. When we're multi-way, we have less chance of winning the pot. So I'd recommend a larger isolate size to 4 big blinds. As for our hands, really top tip to anyone that's watching, playing pots in position versus weaker players is where we make most of our money in this game. Playing versus weaker players anyway, but particularly in position. Our hand is definitely strong enough to isolate. We sort of relish the opportunity here to play against this weaker player because he's limped. He's automatically a weaker player. We want to play pots versus weaker players in position, and our hand is really quite strong. Even if we miss the flop, we have position, we have the range advantage, we get to see bet a bunch. So absolutely want to be playing a pot versus this guy, but we want to isolate him and sort of get him on our own. I'm trying to think of an analogy here. It's kind of like in the wild when a lion's hunting the antelope, they want to get one-on-one with it. So that's the scenario we want to get ourselves. We don't want other players in the pot. We want to be versus this guy so we can eat him essentially. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah.
Fantastic. Excellent. Playing pots versus weaker players is where we make our money in this game. It's a little predatory, but it is true. Playing pots in position versus weaker players is unbelievably important. It is the most profitable spot that we will find ourselves in. It's really important that we are isolating limpers with a little bit of a wider range than some of us might realize. The example that we saw, King 8 suited, that is a slam dunk isolate. If under the gun limps and I am under the gun +1, probably not isolating the King 6, King 7, etc. However, if the cutoff limps and we're on the button, we want to be isolating a really wide range, hands like pocket deuces, pocket threes, a lot of suited King X, Queen 8 suited, and all these types of hands. Really important that we're isolating the limper because, like I say, playing pots in position versus weaker players is the most profitable scenario that we can find ourselves in. So let's go ahead and isolate these limps with the right types of hands that allow us to put ourselves in that scenario. No, let's talk a little bit about exploitative poker. I love this phrase, but we use the solver as a guide. If you're the type of player that is just studying the solver and applying it, then you're leaving a lot of money on the table. Let's talk a little bit about exploitative poker here. In this scenario, the hijack is raised, and this is in theory what the cutoff should be re-raising with. If the hijack is a recreational player, a weaker player, our 3-betting range should be much wider than this. I would 3-bet King, Queen offsuit always, King 9 suited, Queen 10 suited, Jack 10 suited, even Jack 9 suited. I would really widen my 3-betting range here. And the reason being is that when you 3-bet, the hijack in theory is supposed to do a lot of 4-betting with all these weird and wonderful types of hands, and also is supposed to do a lot of folding with hands like Queen 9 suited and Ace 10 offsuit. Weaker players, recreational players, their range is obviously very different to this. So the cutoff gets to 3-bet a wider range. We can even take this one step further. Say, for example, a weaker player raises in the cutoff. If I'm on the button, hands like king 10 offsuit are getting 3-bet, queen jack offsuit, king 8 suited, all these types of hands. Because like I say, the cutoff is not going to 4-bet enough. They're going to call too wide. Their range is bloated. We have an edge on them post-flop anyway. So I want to really put myself in that scenario as much as possible where I'm playing 3-bet pots or, isolating lippers versus weaker players as often as possible because it is such a profitable scenario. Number 4 is a little different to everything we've seen so far. We've spoken a lot about being aggressive, stabbing, c-betting, isolating in position. Let's change that up a little bit and talk about when we need to be a little more passive. Let's go ahead and check out the clip. So defend the big blind here. Looks good to me. And we call the flop. Looks good. Would you ever consider raising the flop with this hand?
Probably not. I think it probably should. 2 overs, backdoor flush draw. It makes a lot of sense, but
Let's pull
hard
up.
to find in.
We're getting all the hard ones today. The small blind versus big blind, single raise pots and 3-bet pots are difficult spots to play. But let's take a little look. So there's a couple of things I want to talk about here. First things first. Before we talk about your strategy, I want to talk about your opponent's strategy. Look how infrequently the small blind is supposed to c-bet in this spot. And I think it's a really big leak that a lot of people have, is that they over c-bet from the point of view of the small blind. And I can pull up 8-8-5 is a kind of obvious when you think about it example. But if you look at something like king 6-5 with a flush draw, don't let me down. The small blind is only supposed to c-bet here 45% of the time. I imagine a lot of us watching this will, 1, be c-betting this way too much, and 2, will agree with me that the players in our player pools are c-betting these types of scenarios way too much. So the point I want to make, 2 points to this first point. 1, when we're the small blinds, we don't want to be c-betting as much as we might think. And 2, when we're the big blind, our opponents are going to be c-betting way too much, which means we need to be really vigilant in the form of floating and in the form of raising. So coming back to this specific board that we looked at, so as we can clearly see here, our hand is never folding. A lot of us might be a little tight here and just fold our overs with the backdoor draws. Really important that we're not folding. And we absolutely want to be raising. Now, when we've seen how much the small blind is supposed to be checking in this spot, and then we sort of think about how much more people are going to be c-betting here, it's really important that we are raising. It's really similar to the spot we saw earlier. It's really important that we're raising a little higher than the solver is, because there is no way that people are pure checking king queen suited. Yeah, they're pocket aces, pocket kings, pocket queens, all these types of hands. Obviously, they've got the strong hands, which they're over c-betting. Excuse me, but far more air in their range, which they're c-betting too much with. So it's really important that we put a lot of pressure on people's ranges when they are way wider than they should be and they have a lot of air. So we've actually already seen 2 brilliant examples so far in this video where the out of position player is the aggressor and has to be a little more passive. We've seen the big blind versus button 3-bet pots. We looked at the 7-3 deuce. Let's just very, very quickly look at a different board in that exact node. Big blind is going to 3-bet, button is going to call. Let's do 7-6-4 flush draw. We will see a very high checking frequency for the big blind. As we can see, checking 69% of the time, really high checking frequency. It's a really low, really connected board that the big blind doesn't connect with too much. And as a result, the checking frequency increases. We've seen the hijack versus button scenario on the really low, really connected flop. And again, hijack is out of position, bad range. As a result, the hijack has to do a lot of checking. So we've seen 2 perfect examples of that. When the board is not great for our range, we're out of position. We obviously have to increase our checking frequencies. Let's take a little look now at a small blind versus big blind single raise pots. Obviously, in this scenario, ranges are really crazy, really, really wide. The small blind is raising so many combos, and obviously the big blind is defending so many combos. But let's take a little look at a board like king 6-5 with a flush draw. Before you check this out, I want you to pause the video and ask yourself how often you think the small blind is supposed to c-bet in this scenario. Hopefully we've had a little guess. Let's take a little look at Lucid GTO and we'll see a very high checking frequency for the small blind, certainly much higher than some of us might have realized. In theory, we're supposed to check here 45% of the time. If we were to look at this board button versus big blind, that betting frequency would increase. So this is a board that is decent for our range. We've got a lot of king X. We connect somewhat with the 6 and the 5. And our checking frequency has increased drastically. If we change this to a much more dramatic board, Something like 6-4-3 with a flush draw. This will be close to a range check for the small blind here. As we can see, checking 81% of the time. So it's really important that we're aggressive in the right spots. However, it's also really important that we understand we're supposed to do a lot of checking in the right spots as well, even when we're the pre-flop aggressor. One of the beautiful things about what I've just said, though, is that whenever we're the aggressor and we're forced to do a lot of checking, we back that up with a really solid, really aggressive, really quite fun check raising strategy. Let's force the check here for the small blind. As we know, the big blind is supposed to do a lot of stabbing here because we're doing a lot of checking. So let's force the stab for the big blind. And as we can see, 19% of the time, we are going to check raise this board. We get to check raise hands like 7s and 8s and 9s and ace-6 and king-6 really, really aggressively. And we've got loads of bluffs to go with it. We've got open-ended straight draws, flush draws. We've got hands like king-jack with a heart. We get to be really quite aggressive because our range is forced to do so much checking on the flop. It essentially means that we're uncapped. We've got all these strong hands in our range, and we get to just be really aggressive. Let's take a little look at the 3-bet pot scenario where we raise on the button, say we're 3-betting from the big blind, and is going to call. Let's do the 7-3 deuce rainbow that we saw earlier. As we know, we're doing a lot of checking here from the point of view of the big blind. Button is going to take a stab, and the big blind is check raising 25% of the time. We're forced to do a lot of checking. We're doing a lot of check raising with hands like 10-9, Jack-10, Jack-9, Ace-Queen, Ace-King, Ace-5, Ace-4, really centering our bluffs around turning as much equity as possible and continuing to barrel when we pick up that equity. Let's look at 10-9 of diamonds here. It can turn a lot of straight draws and a lot of flush draws, so it check raises really quite often. 10-9 of spades, it can turn the straight draw, but it can't turn the flush draw. It is actually just check folding. So going off on a little tangent there, but coming back to the original point, we can't just barrel everything aggressively when we're the pre-flop raiser. We need to be mindful of the fact that when we're out of position, we've got to do a lot more checking than we might have thought. However, we do get to back that up with an aggressive check raising strategy, which is just a lot of fun in my opinion. If you've ever raised pre-flop and the board is good for your range, but you haven't quite connected with it and you're unsure of how to build your c-betting strategies, this next clip is for you. I'm going to break it down in the clip, in the solver. Let's go ahead and check it out. This is really great advice on how to construct your c-betting range with ace high on boards that you've missed. Okay, so we raise in the cutoff. The big blind has defended. We get the King 8-7 with 2 spades. Very interesting flop. So I like to see bet. Am I seeing things? Was that a really quick see bet? It was a little too quick. I think we will just want to slow down. They're having a couple of instances where we might be acting just a little too quick. I'm all for fast poker, but I don't want to say us snap c betting within a couple of seconds because we're not really thinking about this board, how often our range wants to bet, does our hand want to bet. I invite everyone who is watching this right now to pause the video and answer the question that I'm about to ask. How often do we think our range wants to bet cutoff versus big blind single raise pot on King 8-7 with a flush draw? I'm going to estimate about 60%. Hopefully I don't get it wrong. King of spades, 8 of spades, 7 of clubs. 55%, not bad. And if we took less weight from here and put it in here, it would be around about 60%. Okay, so this is, and let's change the board from King 8-7 with a flush draw to King 8 deuce with a flush draw, and we'll see a drastic increase in our c-bet frequency. A really drastic increase. We're now range betting the King 8 deuce flush draw. So the point I want to make here is that this is a very connected board. There's a flush draw. The 8 and the 7 are really quite connected. I'll be honest, I had a quick glance there at the output with our ace queens, and it's actually not c-betting as much as I thought. I thought the ace queen would actually c-bet more than this, both the suited and the unsuited combos. But it's a really quite connected board. Our overall betting frequency is not as high as we might think. Generally, when it comes to c-betting ace high, stronger ace highs, you kind of have to ask yourself, can I get called by enough worse ace highs? So on a board like King 8-7 with a flush draw, when we c-bet here, your ace queen is not getting called by that many worse ace high combos, and certainly not enough to justify c-betting. You're getting called by some ace jack, ace 10, but not that much. Let's change the board now to king 7 deuce rainbow, which is a very extreme example. Maybe not king 7 deuce, because I know that's going to be a range bet. Let's change it to button versus big blind, and let's go king 8 4 rainbow, which is now not a range bet. So now we can see quite a bit of weight in our ace highs, and we can see what I like to call the banana effect, as in ace queen is betting really quite often, and then it sort of curves, and then all of a sudden ace 3, ace 5 betting really quite often again. And there's a method to the madness in Solverland here. There's a reason for this, and as we will see, if we force the bet here for the button, ace queen on king 8-4, our ace queen is now getting called by all sorts of other combos. We're getting called by ace 7 with a backdoor flush draw, ace 9 without a backdoor flush draw, ace 10 offsuit, all combos of ace jack offsuit, etc. So now our ace queen is getting called by more than enough worse ace highs to justify c-betting on this king 8-4 flush draw. The big blind's response is different to a c-bet on king 8-4 flush draw compared to king 8-7 flush draw. And then if you come back and look at the middle of the banana, the ace 10s, ace 9s, a little bit of ace jack. We'll focus on ace 10, ace 9. Not getting called by enough worse combos now when we see bet ace 10 and ace 9. So it doesn't want to value bet. It's, of course, way too strong to bluff. So ace 10, ace 9, not betting anywhere near as much as ace queen because it can't get called by enough worse combos. And then the bottom of the banana, where it curves back round again, are ace 3s, ace deuces, ace 4s. Well, ace 4 is a pair. Ace 3, ace deuce, ace 5. Making enough ace highs folds. So when we force the bet here, say, for example, we've got ace deuce, has a nice backdoor straight draw. Really nice unblockers, good candidates to continue barreling on the turn, but now making enough ace 9, ace 7, ace 6, ace 5 fold. So that's the sort of logic behind how we approach c-betting our ace highs. And one thing I want to say is this is on boards that we're not betting our entire range, because it's really important that we don't take this new information and start applying it to king 7 deuce rainbow, where we should be either betting our entire range or simplifying. King 7 deuce rainbow would just bet our entire range. We don't need to worry about the banana effect. However, if the board is somewhat middling, connected, wet, we approach it like that. We ask ourselves, so we look at the board, let's do something like king 6-5 flush draw. And we ask ourselves, if I c-bet here with ace queen, can I get called by enough worse ace high combos? And the solver is determining that on king 6-5, obviously it can. It's now getting called by ace jack, ace 10, ace 9, etc. Whereas on king 8-7, the ace jacks and ace 10s are less inclined to call, and therefore our ace queen can't c-bet as much. So this is a really interesting hand straight off the bat, our decision to c-bet, etc. Just remember, not all king high boards are the same. The more connected, the wetter the other two cards are, the more checking that we're going to have to do. So long story short, I don't think we want to be snap acting here. We want to be asking ourselves all these questions and thought-provoking questions about our range and how it wants to approach this spot. Our final clip is all about timing tells, not so much about the timing tells that we're giving off, but more about the type of poker player that we want to be. You guys will see what I mean in just a second. Let's go ahead and check it out. I'm curious to see what our hero decides to do. And again, instantly checking. I knew that this is not just in my mind. We've checked back within about 2 seconds here. Players who snap c-bet, snap check back, they're not thinking about their range. They're not thinking about their opponent's range. They're not really thinking every situation through. So it's really important. It's a really common thing that I see. Let's just slow it down, not give away any timing tells first and foremost. I know that you're really quite weak here because you've snap checked back, which means I'm going to follow through on the river with all my bluffs. I'm going to trap you a little bit more on the river with hands which are normally pure bets. I think you're weak here. You're more likely to have to bluff the river. I'm going to trap you a little more. So let's really slow it down. Let's really think about our options. Let's engage our brains as much as we can, because it's not just a case of, Well, my hand wants to see bet here, so I'm going to see bet. There are other things to think about. Or my hand doesn't want to bet the turn here, so I'm going to check. There are other things to think about. Timing tells are really important. There's no doubt about that. In a game of information, we don't want to give free information to our opponents about the strength or the weakness of our hand. That is really important. However, the point that I want to make is a bit more broad, and it is 10 times more important. It's about the type of poker player that we want to be. There are so many different things that we want to be thinking about at every opportunity. What does my range look like? If I'm not betting this hand, what does my betting range look like? What does my checking range look like? What does my opponent's range look like? I'm not just talking about flop scenarios here, but about turn and river scenarios as well. If we're the type of player that is instantly just acting, we're thinking about our hand. We're not thinking about our range or our opponent's range or bet sizes and frequencies. And these are the really important factors that we need to be considering to be very, very good poker players. The best players in the world, the Linus Loves, the Doug Polks, they're not just instantly acting. They're not just thinking about their hand and how their hand wants to play. They're thinking about their range, their opponent's range. They're really using as much brain power as possible to break down the scenario and have a really great understanding of what they're supposed to do. As well as that, if we're just instantly acting, if we're just thinking about how our hand wants to play, we're doing something called autopiloting, and that is a really, really expensive way to play poker. Whenever we play poker, we want to be focused and centered and really thinking about every scenario, really using as much of our brain power as possible. And it's really important that we're thinking every spot through and not just autopiloting and trying to be the best poker player that we can be. So that is going to do it for this video. 6 really important leaks that I see all the time working with Upswing Poker. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this video. If you liked this video, let me know, and I'll be sure to do another one soon. My name has been Gary Blackwood. Thank you very much for watching. On behalf of Upswing Poker, take it easy.